I can't be prouder of having you guys doing this. But I want to say that SDIG, since its inception, committed to issues of equity and social justice. But as you all well know, the dual pandemic, or what I call dual pandemic, the pandemic of COVID-19 and, of course, the systemic racism that has vibrated throughout the world, the work we had intended to do at SDI has been ignited with a burning fire. We expanded our position that we're going to expand around the world because it's not limited to a particular geographical location. And our commitment to be very inclusive in terms of race, gender, equity, and all the issues associated with isms. SDIG provides a safe, open, and inclusive engagement place where we raise awareness and help people to know that if they don't have any spot to articulate their views or the pains they go through, we have a comforting location for them to do exactly that. And we are committed to working through that. So today, we have these people that I've not worked with them for too long, but they've impressed me beyond what I could express in words. This is their first assignment, and this assignment will have a long life. So it's my pleasure to talk as much as I can, but I'm not gonna do that because they put a limited time on me. So I wanna congratulate Yung Chin, who is a graduate of National Taiwan University, as well as Tokyo Gakuya University.
It's actually Gakuye University.
Okay. Yung Chu has done so much, and wise organizations have picked her up, including, of course, SDIG. She does a lot of work in human resource, learning and developmental programs across the world. She resolves problems utilizing her technical skills to solve problems. And so I don't need to say too much. Her work is obvious, and we are so glad to have her within our mix. And the second one, I just realized that our very own Mona Lisa, she is at University of Ghana, where she lectures. She is a specialist in human resource and educational consultant. She coordinates projects, and she does something they call Siono de Ghana. She's a certified CV service professionals and human resource and educational consultant, and of course, soft skill advocates. But the one that amazes me is that I saw a glimpse of this woman and saw the passion with which she sort of taught people about not to worry about any location they find themselves, that they should do what they do, adapt to the situation, that they should just keep their chin up, and they're gonna have a better tomorrow. And of course, there are so many other SDIG members that I'm not gonna be going to talk about. So with that said, I want you to stay tuned and watch what I've seen behind for them to unveil. So Yung Chu and Mona Lisa, back to you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Joseph. And let me introduce our third panelist, Ms. Natsumi Funabiki, Dr. Morlake Adekle, and Mr. David Rowell. Ms. Natsumi Funabiki is a consultant in Global Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Consultancy, the DREAM Collective. She oversees business development and project management as a client lead. Her expertise and experience in Japan's business sector will help us to capture the general idea of sustainable change in female representation and leadership in the corporate landscape in Japan. So our second panelist is Dr. Morlake Adekle. She's the Dean at the School of Journalism and Digital Media, University of the Gambia. And she's also the board chair of Total Development International Foundation, Nigeria and Ghana, and currently the president of Association of African Women for Research and Development, the Gambia. Her continuous involvement in African women rights makes us really look into the challenges and changes in Africa in gender equity. So last panelist is Mr. David Roval. He's an international trainer, facilitator, coach, consultant, and speaker in diversity, gender, LGBTQ+, and team building in the US. He worked as a special emphasis program manager, a diversity ambassador, and a leader of a gender mainstreaming working group with the US government. His experience in the area of women and LGBTQ+ helps us to have a broader view when we look at gender equity. So I have introduced the three panelists. Now let me turn it over to the other moderator, Mona Lisa.
Thank you, Yinchu. So it only goes to show that we have a full house of people who know what they're going to talk about, despite all our individual views as audience members and participants. But let me start on the basis of what I think I know, which is nothing. Gender equity. Please, let me throw my bias away and leave it for our panel members to do justice to, because my opinion is not needed right now. So I'm going to start with Miss Natsumi. I think Yinchu taught me to say Natsumi Fenabiki-san. Is it san or sans? That's the little Japanese I've learned so far. So what does gender equity mean to you, Natsumi?
Thank you so much, Mona Lisa. And yes, perfect pronunciation for my name, all good. Gender equity to me, I think it really is that means to achieve gender equality. It's on the road to get equal rights. And I think it's really understanding that we don't have equality right now. There are barriers, there are challenges and differences in that gender space. So understanding that. I think for me personally, to provide a bit of insight into why I'm in this space is really, I had the privilege of being in different kind of backgrounds and different environments while growing up. And one thing, or two things actually, that really stood out to me in that space was my gender as well as my race. Understanding that there were different challenges in different ways that I was perceived because of those. I think especially in Japan, there is a complete lack of representation in that gender space. I wanted to make a change there. And so my work here at the Dream Collective is really ensuring that, you know, very shortly, our mission is to see more women leaders, to see more females in leadership. So really excited to be here with you today. And thank you for inviting me.
Great. Taking from what you said, Dr. Adekunle, what does gender equity mean to you?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Gender equity, you know, at times you need to make a differentiation between gender equity and equality. Because at times when you are talking of equality, you might actually be shortchanging some people, because equity is give to each person what that person actually requires, you know, to be fulfilled. That's what you give to the person. For instance, the simple illustration is that when you have somebody who is tall, who wants to reach a particular height, and you have a shorter person who wants to get to that, reach to take something there, you know, if you want to help them and you want to give them stools to stand on, you are not going to give them the same height, stools of the same height, because they don't have the same height. The individuals that are involved. So that is just the simple illustration for equity. You give each person what is required to make that person maybe fulfilled, happy, or to acquire, you know, their end or their mission. So that is what equity is about. And for me as a person, I was not brought up in an environment where there was gender discrimination. No, my dad was not like that. So I think it was when I got into the public space that I started to experience gender discrimination. And because of the kind of upbringing I had, the kind of father that I had that was always trying to uphold the human rights of everybody, I just developed this fighting spirit, you know, that I will not suffer anyone to trample on my human right, because I was never brought up to see myself as an inferior person. I was never brought up to see myself as a weak person. So anytime I came across anybody trying to put me down, I will put on my, fighting. I mean, my fighting spirit is challenged, and I know I started to resist. And so I would say that is how I got into this idea of not only just being a gender activist, but you can also call me a human rights activist, because I will not suffer the rights of anyone for that matter, to be trampled on. So I think my upbringing prepared me for that kind of life in the public space.
And that ended well for me, knowing where those shots come from. At least let me hit my shoulder, because she was my senior most colleague when I was teaching. David, there are banters coming towards your way. So just give us, what is your opinion on gender equity?
My opinion is a definition I refer to. It's more along the lines of parity in value and voice. As a little background, when I worked for the federal government, we were struggling with the representation issue, trying to get more women represented in different levels of the government. And it occurred to me that that outcome has to be based off of more valuing of women, more respect towards women. That should be the outcome of that. The real problem is that men are given more respect. Men's voices are valued more. So when I talk about gender equity, it's all about raising the value and voice of women, more so than simply representation or pay scales. Certainly all those things are relevant, and all those things are goals, but to me they're all born of the respect and the value piece. They can be legislated, of course. You can make rules. There's plenty of rules out there about representation and pay, but I think if we really worked on the valuing of women more, giving them equal respect, in parity with men, I think that's the crux of the situation.
Okay, that actually gets me into my next question. Of course, I will start with Natsumi again. What are the systemic, from where David ended off, as in women, and the fact that definitely there are a few challenges when it comes to men, or when it comes to the other gender? What are the systemic and structural barriers to gender equity, especially where you are, because we're talking across borders?
Yes, so today I'm dialing in from Tokyo, Japan, and I am Japanese, so I'll be talking to that. When we talk about systemic barriers, especially for gender equity in Japan, I think the core kind of key factor is the traditional norms and gender norms and roles in society. So a lot of people, if you're dialing in from Japan, you'll know that a big problem here is that work-life imbalance, and that having a heavy toll on women's participation in the workforce, into leadership, in politics, and it transcends all over. Looking at that, there's actually some studies done around, how much work a woman spend in kind of the hours for household and childcare, and that comes up to, when you have a child of under 6 years, 7.5 hours a day. That's basically, one full working day. So you can see that it's very hard for women when they go into childcare, when they go into household work, to come back into the workforce. That's a big barrier there for that. And I think leading on from that, that's that unconscious bias that's very prevalent in society. as David was talking to a little bit, there is some structures and systems that are in place to support gender equity, but then the mindset needs to change. That bias needs to be controlled in order for people to really uptake those changes and be able to proactively support an action towards that. So for Japan, I would say those two key points are those traditional gender norms and roles in society, and the unconscious bias that comes throughout as well.
Thank you. Dr. Adekule, you are going to talk from our African point of view. So please cover us from Ghana to Gambia and Nigeria inclusive for systemic and structural barriers.
Okay, thank you so much. And I want to commend you because I did not remember to do that for putting together that wonderful program. You know, Yingsu and Mona Lisa, you have really done, you know, a great job. You know, I'm really very, very proud of the two of you. You know, talking about these systemic problems that we have with gender, generally in Africa, we see that there are still a lot of things that we are struggling with, things that people take for granted in the developed world. You know, for instance, like gender segregation when it comes to the type of jobs that women, and men are engaged in, like saying that this is for women, is subtle. It's not something that people really, they don't articulate it, but you see it in practice. Like you go, you know, for interview, and you apply for a kind of job, and people don't take you because they say that, oh, before you know it, they are asking for maternity leave. They are saying they are going to take their children, you know, to for clinic, you know, it's all those things. So there is this subtle thing that discriminating against women, you know, in terms of employment, and even in terms of pay too. Like you live, when it comes to, when it comes to taxes, you see women pay more taxes than men because they say that a man has more responsibility to the family, you know. And so you see, when you look at somebody who is on the same pay level with you, you compare the amount of tax that you pay. You see, you are paying more than that person because they are giving this person tax exemption for different things. They are saying that this person has a lot of responsibility, family responsibility. But the reality is that even as a woman, you also have, you know, family responsibilities, financial responsibilities. But people tend to overlook that. And just like Nasmi has said, you know, the socialization within the family is damaging to women in two ways. You know, like I was talking of my own socialization. I've been liberated by the kind of socialization given to me by my dad, but a lot of people are not given that kind of socialization. So even at times when you're trying to talk about issues of liberating women, you'll be surprised that women will stand up to oppose you, because they are saying that, well, what are you saying? That these are natural roles of women. That these are the things that women are supposed to do, because the socialization, you know, has made them to believe that these are their natural roles and this is what they have to do. And some of them, they don't believe that they should try to actualize themselves, you know, in a better way, you know, treat the height of their career. They just say, you're a woman. You know, I used to have somebody who was an acquaintance, and this person was telling me that girls are not supposed to be too ambitious, because when you reach the height of your career, you'll not be able to take proper care of your home. And that's the kind of socialization that the average African woman has, because you are supposed to, most of the time, sacrifice your advancement in career. You know, you are supposed to sacrifice your advancement in career for your family. So we have this problem. Now, when you look at nations of Africa, they have come together to enact laws and all the rest. For instance, in the Gambia here, we have the gender policies. You know, we've been having consistent gender policies covering decades. You know, there is one now that is going to be from 2020, you know, 2030, you know, we have different gender policies. We have the Women's Act that has been signed into law, and the government tries, you know, at least to ensure that the rights of women are protected. But you see, we have these policies, but weak in implementation. Because why are these policies weak in implementation? Individuals that are supposed to see to the enforcement of these policies are not willing. I mean, especially when they are men. You see somebody who has suffered from domestic violence, has been harassed, and the person goes to the police station to report. The police idea is that you are a woman, your husband must beat you once in a while so that you can be sensible. You need that women need beating in order to make them to be sensible. They are emotional, so it's only beating that can help them to be rational. That's what is in the mind of that policeman. So the policeman said, "What happened in your family? You know, what do you? And can you tell me again what you say happened?" And you just see the policeman is not really being proactive in attending to this issue because the police is biased, and you know that's why we try to do different things like involve male in all these things. So individuals are sabotaging all the government effort to put the right policies in place. Women Affairs Ministry trying to protect the rights of women and all that. But we have individuals within the system because of their socialization, because of their religious views, they don't want to see women liberated. You know,
Wow. Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
So there are definitely a lot of similarities between Africa and Japan, I guess, in terms of tax, in terms of child caregiving, and in terms of socialization, I guess.
Yes.
I think so.
You know, you within our system here, if you're a man and you if you're a man and you share maybe domestic chores with your wife, or you child caring, oh, you are an effeminate man. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. I cannot wait to hear more about David's point of view in terms of
Yeah.
First, to Dr. Deckley's last comment. Okay, well, I cooked dinner for my wife last night, and I clean the house now and then. But that being said, in fact, I clean the house more than she does because she works more hours than I do at this point in time. That being said, there are some similarities. I think the basis of the systemic discrimination is the same. The roots are the same, although you might say that in the U.S. we've kind of grown away from those roots maybe a little bit farther, especially more so than Africa and even some in Japan. But those roots being socialization, that bias, as Dr. Deckley talked about, is still built into the way we raise our children, that boys are still valued more and given different opportunities than the girls are. To some degree, I mean, that degree may not be as wide or as vast here in the U.S. as it is elsewhere, but it's still there. And then that plays into the gender roles we select for men and women. Now, again, here in the U.S., we've advanced a little bit more in that. We've done a great job recently with, again, women into STEM fields, for example. I worked in a scientific organization for a number of years, and we made great strides into moving women into STEM occupations. Well, if we think about it, though, those STEM occupations were traditionally male occupations. So we've made a focus of trying to make women fit into the male society in a sense, in that way. I would argue that as much emphasis as we placed on getting women to take on male roles, there should be just as much value in getting men to take on traditional female roles. As much as we want women to get into STEM fields to help increase their economic position and their prestige position, why don't we reward men for going into caregiving positions, for example? More men into education, more men into teaching, more men into nursing and caregiving activities. And really, when we get that balance, that's when, in my mind, that's when we're going to have true parity. It's not just about giving women the same thing that men have. It's about the balance is really making everything more equal, if you will. And I think the U.S., as I said, is a little bit farther along in that, but there's still, in my mind, a long way to go.
Right.
But strides are being made. Certainly, in terms of pay, the pay is getting closer here in the U.S. It's not quite on parity yet, but it's getting closer. But that's just a result of trying to get more women into the not only male dominated, but that's been the preferred roles. You know, it's always the male preferences that carry the day, right? That have this way, that earn the most value, that get the most pay, and so we try to get women into that. But let's aim for balance. Let's value male occupations and female occupations and get more women into male occupations and get more men into female occupations. And to me, that's when we strike true parity and balance.
But since you started talking about that area, let me just ask, are those improvements that are already happening, are there conversations in that area? Because of course, we can all see that US is kind of advanced in that area. Is that happening? Is that only in your opinion?
No,
what
it
kind
is.
of conversations in that direction do you think?
No, it is. The statistics I'll show, and I don't have specific numbers on hand, but there have been a lot more women moving into the STEM occupations before, the science, the math occupations, engineering, etc. And that migration has and is taking place. And there are more men going into nursing, for example, but that's happening at a much slower rate. As far as the pay, that pay scale, although it's a very small, the gap is closing slowly, very slowly, much slower than it should, of course, but the pay gap has narrowed a little bit. I wouldn't say substantially at all. So yeah, advancements are made. And it's almost kind of like we're manipulating the system in a sense. We're working on mitigating the symptoms rather than going to the root problem, which to me is the bias piece of it. But the bias piece is always the hardest piece to deal with, so we're working on the symptoms instead, and we're making progress on the symptoms.
But does it look like, so we're making progress? Are these obvious progress that will in the end, and how in the end are we seeing short term, long term, longer term?
I'll give you a short answer, and then we'll turn it over to our other panelists to weigh in.
Sure.
And only speak in the U.S. I think one good measurement of that is to look at representation in government. Obviously, there are more women in the U.S. Congress with this last cycle than ever before, and with that representation comes power and respect and those type of things that we're working towards. And so we can see progress in that arena in terms of representation. At the higher levels of industry, corporate boards, for example, we have seen more women get into corporate boards recently. Now, there's a little bit flux there. It kind of waxes and wanes a little bit, but the general trend is that more women are getting onto corporate boards within the U.S. and the other Western countries as well.
Wow. I'll turn back to Dr. Adekunle. From the African point of view, especially in Gambia where you are, I think I heard you say early on that there was an act. And so I presume something is happening in terms of improvements and conversations?
Yes. We are having improvements, in different areas, like I said, there is, I can say that the government is willing, the will is there, but maybe implementation is sabotaged to a large extent by the views of individuals. Because here in the Gambia, the vice president is female, and recently the Ministry of Women's Affairs was separated from the office of the vice president, and everybody knows that domestic violence, which is usually more against women, is a very serious offense in the Gambia. That is, if the police will do their duty, it's really a very serious. And this practice of withdrawing girls from school for marriage, early marriage and forced marriage combined together. Girls are withdrawn from school, and I think I've had occasion to share my experience of a particular, as a university teacher. There was a particular young lady in my class that's very, very brilliant, and I just saw that she was always crying in class, or almost 2 weeks later, she disappeared, only for us to learn that she had been forced out of school into marriage. So these things happen, even though there are laws in place that should not allow that to happen. But we have two major problems here. We have culture and we have religion. There are certain things, that are cultural, and others are religious. So people, when they are faced with this things that are permitted by religion or what culture allows, then there's nothing you can do, because they say that, are you not this, are you not that, or don't you understand the culture, or don't you know what the religion permits, and then you cannot, your hands are tied. So these are the problems that we have. For instance, the government outlawed FGM, you know, and we still have people who practice. They outlawed the FGM and did everything they could, even empowering the people that were involved in the practice, so that they could get other things, I mean, means of livelihood, you know. So the government tried everything they could, but there are still some people who believe that maybe religion allows them, or religion compels them to do female circumcision. So I can say that we are making progress, because there is higher level of attendance of females in school and higher level of retention, because all these things are related, you know. For reproductive reasons, girls drop out of school, teenage pregnancy, and all the rest. But and then empowering women too. A lot is being done on, even though, as David rightly observed, these are just treating the symptoms. You know, we are just treating symptoms, because we have a deep root. You know, the base is there. You know what? Yes. So and to really,
So let me
I won't deceive
confirm
you.
that.
Tackling this.
So what you are trying to say is that actually the progress is very slow, but even
Yeah,
though the government is trying to do something on it.
Yes, we have the progress. Yes, we've made progress in certain areas, but in other areas, for instance, in the area of enrollment of girls, yes, there is a lot of progress. Retention in school, there is a lot of progress, but there are other areas in which we have not been able to record much progress. People still get married, you know, without their consent. Nobody even informs them before they marry them off.
Right.
You can be absent, you can travel out of the country, and you are married off in your absence.
Wow. Oh, beautiful. If we keep that, I'm sure we'll go on till tomorrow. But that that leads to Natsumi. If you could give us any improvements that you're seeing or conversations happening in your country currently.
Sure. I think for Japan, I'd like to say that it is still slow, but I will focus on the improvements or conversations that are happening, especially in that kind of corporate and political space. Since 2015, like in terms of government, in terms of systems as well, there was an active promotion on women's participation in the workforce. There was a government push as well as corporate push in terms of making sure that they had these procedures around, you know, female leadership, around unconscious bias, and really making sure that there was, you know, taking away the barriers, but also providing more opportunities for women. So this did actually increase the kind of workforce for women between the, you know, ages of employment from around 60% to over 70% now, which is a good thing in just looking at the numbers. What I will add on to that, more than that, is actually though that some of them are not full-time employment. A lot of them are part-time. So you see that still there's a barrier for women to be fully in the workforce. And that's not just for corporate, but also for political representation as well. There's been a lot of talk about having more female politicians, having representation. It still falls at around 9%, 10% in terms of female politicians in the government, which is, I think, the lowest in the G7. And for Japan to say we are, you know, a country that's leading the economy, you know, having all of that leadership, to see that level of representation is really disheartening, and it shows that there's a lack of role modeling and leadership in that gender space. So that is something that, you know, they talk a lot about change, but it's actually, I would say, it's not happening as fast as it should, with the urgency that we really need in this space. And then in the corporate world, it's also very, very low. So I think in terms of executive board members, in Japan, it's around under 4%. And then for even senior management, it's around 12% as well. So you can see that it's not about, you know, there's nothing there. We actually do have a systemic problem, and it needs to be addressed with more urgency. So there's improvement in terms of it's, you know, there's awareness around it, but I would say in terms of the action and urgency, it's still lacking.
That's sad, because it means that across board, it's not just an African thing or a particular continent thing, or it happens all over. And I don't know, maybe slowly as we make conversation about it, improvements will happen. But like we have all identified so far, it's a slow process, but we'll take it as it comes. I just want to say that to panel members, we're very grateful. And for my final questions, before I do that, participants, please put questions or contributions in the chat box because it's open for all of us. We would take it as the question session comes up. Now, my final question is, are there any specific ways for panel members, any success stories that they are using or that they have been able to come up with in advocating for change? I would start with David.
I would say I worked with a group a couple of years ago in Kansas City where they were trying to get more women representation in the political sphere, starting with, it was called the Appointments Project, whereby those positions where we can just appoint people, there's a push made to appoint women into starting governmental position in the hopes that they would go on to run for higher office. And there was some success with that program. It did get more women to consider running for office to begin with. So I think that program worked in was quite a success. I know it was mentioned, Natsumi mentioned unconscious bias, and to me that's always a good starting point because the problem really is the bias piece.
Yeah.
Unconscious bias training is a starting point, but we need to follow that up with activities that open up a dialogue. I'm a big believer in dialogue, and that's why I'm with SDIG to begin with, because I think these conversations are so
sorry
valuable.
to cut in here a little bit. Could you please explain it shortly? What is bias? Because maybe some audience here are not familiar with it.
Bias or unconscious bias specifically?
I believe she would say unconscious bias, but you should start with bias.
Bias, of course, is our own feelings and perceptions of people primarily different than us. Obviously, there's been a lot of attention given to racial biases, for example. So there's gender bias, there's bias against disabled people, for example. Any group that we have negative perceptions of or feelings towards, those are our biases. Many of those biases are unconscious. We aren't aware of them. We act on them all the time, but they're in subconscious space where we act and behave based on those biases without realizing it in many cases. And so to get past that, we do training that makes people aware of what those biases are, whether there's racial biases, gender biases, whatever. So, we can, that's really another solution. That's really one solution to get towards those biases. But going back to what the other panelists are saying a lot of the roots are in socialization. So I think a lot of the solutions are in the socialization also. I think one benefit we have here in the US and other Western countries is the media is on board with trying to eradicate some of these perceptions, biases, etc. And you see in the media advertisements, for example, that show male caregivers, or you show advertisements that show females in positions of power, for example. TV programming likewise. And that all goes back to trying to get to that socialization piece to unsocialize those biases to begin with. And I think anytime we can, we mentioned role models, assuming we mentioned role models in Japan, if we can elevate the role models, that helps attack those biases and stereotypes, and the socialization has been put in place also. So elevating role models, using media to show other perspectives, attacking biases through unconscious bias training, all those type of things can make headway.
Wow.
Yeah, role model media certainly takes an important role in this area on gender equity, I guess, because David had also already mentioned about Natsumi's because she's in Japan. Would you like to say something on this topic?
Sure, definitely. I think in the way that we advocate for change, and I would like to say that, every day I am advocating for change in my role, like being in that DEI space. I think one thing definitely is that David talked about this a little bit, where it is really about changing the bias that we have, the unconscious mindsets that we may be portraying. And that is the reason why these small things pile up and we are in the society that we are in now. What I see in terms of change and what really excites me is when we go from the hard infrastructure, the laws, the regulations that exist, that then lead to more impact into the soft infrastructure. So encouraging people, say for example, to take parental leave, encouraging more participation in that gender workspace. But when we get to impacting the mindset, especially for men in the gender equity space, that's when we can see real change, because we talk about gender equity as if it's a woman's problem, and it's not. It's about actually making sure that men are involved in that conversation. So we talk a lot right now about allyship in the gender equity space as well, making sure that even if you are not the underrepresented group, you know how to be able to understand, be aware, and support progress in that space. So I think that's the goal of where we want to get to, and I'm really excited to see some people, some companies taking an active stance in that space. So I do hope that can in Japan as well.
Wow, 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 wow. Dr. Dekule, can you land? Since we're still up there, let you land.
Yes, so talking of, I think what you want us to talk about is maybe interventions that we have been involved in, and personally, I've been involved in women's empowerment, especially empowering women to participate more socio-politically. We've trained be politicians on how to conduct rallies, political rallies, how to mobilize people to vote for them, how to write their manifestos, just empowering women. And they're trying to demystify the whole process, because women think that participating in politics or as people, as contestants, is something that is so burdensome and something that they don't want to involve themselves in. So we try to let them know that it's what they can do, So, and then at times you see some of these international agencies actually sponsor their campaigns, they sponsor their rallies. So, but we train them on how to write their manifestos, how to mobilize people. Then we also make sure that we do male involvement. We really target males, male involvement in gender advocacy, because males many times they are the problem. The reason is that for me, how I see it is just a kind of slave master relationship. When the system seems to favor the males, and so they want to propagate a system that favors them. So we try to let them know that the world cannot fly on one wing. Everybody has to do it together. So we involve male in all these things through seminars and all the rest. Then basically we also target the media because of their gatekeeping and agenda setting roles. Whatever the media want to get into the public space is what they get into the public space. So when you catch when you just like catch them at the point when they are being trained, because I'm a trainer of media practitioners, as I teach in the School of Journalism. So we try as much as possible to emphasize gender issues, in our training, so that when they go out, the way they report, the kind of programs that they put up there, we promote gender sensitivity in the population and help to spread awareness. Then, policy watch too. Policy watch, like trying to ensure that you watch the policy of the government, and they'll make our comments on whatever we see going wrong, because we know that policies are important. Government works on policy, and you can only also take people up legally based on government policies. So that is why we also look at the areas of government policy. Then we also target religious leaders, especially when it comes to issues that they believe are sacrosanct, like maybe people believe that, okay, females must be circumcised, those are, so we sort of target religious leaders and get other religious leaders to speak to them, because most of them are not real, they are imagined, because they cannot be supported from the holy books. they cannot be supported, but people just believe that this must be. So those are the kind of strategies that we have been using, and we realize basically that women's empowerment is really, really very essential if women are going to be able to stand up and speak for themselves. So,
may I say something real quick? I know it was brought up about male allyship, and obviously that's important. It is a gender problem. It's not a women's problem, a female problem. It's a gender problem, and gender includes males and females. I can't speak for the other countries involved in this conversation, but in the US anyways, I've seen statistics that 73% of men want to be allies of women in the cause of parity and equity. They just don't know how. So there's an education piece that we can address there, is trying to teach men how to be allies. I think the majority by that study anyway says that they're ready and willing. It's just a matter of filling in the blank. How do we make men better allies of women? What do they do? What do they need to do?
Right. So I see a question here, and participants, please, you can put your questions in the chat box. I want to read the first question. That kind of, I don't know what I typed in. Yes, Topo Jubanti. So my question is around intersectionality. We as an organization are trying to integrate intersectionality into our programs and processes, but there's a resistance from the people working in and in the area
of diversity, equity, inclusion within our organizations.
Is wondering what interventions are implemented around the world to address this, and what are some of the positive outcomes. So around the world, so let me see. I would give that to Natsumi. Around the world, yes.
Of course, from Japan, and that this might not be a great answer to the question really, but Japan is a very homogenous country. So I think the population is around 98% Japanese. So that provides little space for intersectionality in terms of race, in terms of a lot of different areas. What I would say in terms of the resistance piece, though, like when you see resistance, it really is to provide as much awareness and as much education as possible. It's about, as we were talking about a lot today as well, there's bias that exists because of these intersections and because of these different layers of diversity that people hold. So it's about understanding and having different perceptions and awareness discussions as well on, you know, what could be the reason why there's resistance, what are the different challenges that people are facing, having the voices of the intersectionality, like the diverse voices out there, to make sure there's enough room for them. So that would be my answer, is to really take the resistance full on, make sure there's enough proactive action there, and awareness and education is really the key first step for that.
Okay.
Well, Dr. Adekunle, yes.
Yeah, just like what the last speaker just said, you know, in Africa here, we don't have so much of that because, I mean, talking of intersectionality, we are Black, and we are Africans, and we don't really have this problem with racial discrimination. But there is another area that maybe you want to talk about, and that is when you talk of gender minorities, you know. The truth of it that we need to face is that in Africa is a no-go area, you know, because culture and religion does not permit this. I mean, the issue of gender minority. You know, many countries have put out laws, you know, against it, and maybe when we look at it from that regard, I don't really, for me, if you ask me how you can tackle that in Africa, I'll just tell you, I cannot say, because when you have the issue of religion, you know, maybe culture, yes, at least maybe that can be more flexible. But when you're talking of religion here in Africa, it's really a no-go area. So that is it.
Actually, so, I would like to add on a little bit data point, which is the Global Gender Gap Index 2021. Actually, in Gambia is actually 127, whereas Japan is 120, and then US is 30. So You can pretty much see the gap over there, but yeah, just for your information.
Okay, so I see a question here. I don't know whether it's a question, but yes, Dr. Anwoye, he says governments are able to come to with policies, but there seems to be problem in all places in the context of the policies. So what should we do to ensure that policies are consistent with practices? David.
I'll jump on that. Yeah, I had, and I'll call it a privilege to have worked with a UN organization when I was working with the U.S. federal government, and it became very clear to me that the UN was further along in their efforts than the organization I was working with. And I think really that's a good model. They're kind of leading the way. They have a lot of resources available. They have more of a consistent view, or global, a broad view. And so first and foremost, I would try to model some of the activities that they're doing. The He for She campaign has been very successful, for example. They're involved, their take on gender, besides He for She, they also do what's called gender mainstreaming. Basically, when I had worked with them, every meeting, when there was a proposal on the table of some new program, they would weigh out the benefits for both men and women separately. You know, how will this impact men, and how will this impact women? And when you ask that question separately, you get to a more consistent answer, an answer that meets the needs of both sectors. And so to answer Dr. Nawawi's question, certainly some governments are doing this better than others, but on a global scale, I think the UN is a good starting point to see what programs they got going and how they have addressed some of these issues.
Oh, hold on. I got another question popping up.
Right. Yeah.
This
can
is
I
from
say something about last question? Can I say
Dr.
something
Adekunle,
about?
please go.
Yes, like David has just said about mainstreaming gender into the different programs. For instance, in the policy, gender policy of the Gambia, gender is mainstreamed into health, into education, you know, into all aspects, you know, of the national life. Gender is mainstreamed. In spite of that, I think we still need to synthesize, get to the people at the individual level, you know, try to organize programs that can actually change people's behavior, you know.
Right.
We have to change their behavior, change their practices at the individual level. And the factors that actually influence people are religion, you know, and there may be some cultural beliefs. So that's why we target religious leaders too. You know, when religious leaders change, they are likely to influence their congregants. So those are very, very important, because even when the government sets out people to go and monitor, the monitors themselves, because of their bias, don't affect any change, and they don't penalize anyone. You don't see any penalty going to people who are violators of rules and regulations. So that's why individuals must be targeted.
I think there's a question from, I don't know. There's a question from
Sorry,
Olawale.
Mona Lisa. Before we jump into the other question, because we are actually 7 minutes over our time. So I would just like to say, if you want to stay here, please stay, and we will answer your question. But I would like to say that if you are leaving because you have another things to do after this event, please be free to contact our panelists, and we will share their contact information in the chat box, so that you can ask any question if you have any questions about their services.
Okay.
And you can just simply click the link and contact them. Sorry, next questions.
Okay, so Steve, I think Rolf, does the panel think political leadership affects gender equality? Okay, so I can give that to Natsumi. Political leadership?
Political leadership, I really would say that it does affect gender equality, especially in the mindset around, you know, leadership, how you can see the policy building. Because as I think I mentioned before, that Japan has a very low rate of female politicians in the first place. We have never had a political leader that has been female in terms of the prime minister. We may have one next. We're not sure about that, but I do think it really does curate that country's kind of way of leadership and the kind of the big portrayal in a sense. One example I would like to say, not from Japan actually, but a great role model for leadership is actually from New Zealand. I think their prime minister has made it a very, conscious decision to have her kind of feminine leadership style, having that empathy, having the very kind of warm environment that sometimes in politics, we have a very male-centered way of leadership where, it's all about like having a stern face and not being empathetic and to the rules. And I think Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand has done a great job in having that, female way of leading to be a strong leadership role model as well. So in a sense, I do think it does show, first of all, a big role modeling, and then second of all, the different types of leadership that we can see in politics as well. So I'd say it does have a big impact there.
Okay, this will be my final take, and that will be it. The last question is basically, what new practices, mode of engagement, advocacy could be explored to ensure that policy objectives, I think, are better achieved? David?
Well, I'd have to ask, in what sphere we're talking, if we're talking in the public sphere, or whether we're talking in the workplace, or...
This one looks generic, so he didn't say any particular...
Well, I think one thing we can do is elevate role models across the board, whether that's within an organization or whether that's in the political sphere or even in the public sphere. As much as we increase the voice of women, give them the opportunity to be out there, out front as role models and as voices, I think that's one of the biggest things we can do is just elevate those voices as much as possible. If, for example, if we're invited to a conference, we can suggest that female come along with us and even give them podium time. If we're in a meeting, make sure that the women's voices get as much volume as the men's voices. If we are even within religious institutions, make sure that whatever women have any positions within religious leadership, that those voices get elevated. Or I think that's something everyone can do. It's not just men in position of power. It's not even women that can do it. Anyone can amplify the voices of women and increase the volume and make them role models.
That's beautiful. Yes, Dr. Adekunle, yes. Just quick one.
Yes, quickly. It's very important to know the track record of someone and to know their ideological stand before you ask them to be enforcers of policies. You can put people, for instance, look at the Supreme Court of the US. Look at what Trump did before he left. Judges are supposed to follow certain rules of the law before they give judgment. But at the same time, we know that their biases are also important. And so he was putting people who will follow, his line of thoughts in place. The same way, in every department of government, you can look at the track record of people, look at their ideological stand, and put them in places, being sure that this is what they stand for. They are going to enforce the rules. Now we have people who just ignore the rules, they will not enforce because of their own biases. So I think that is also important. Enforcers must be people who are gender sensitive.
And on that note,
thank you.
I want to say thank you. Thank you to the panel members. My job is done. I will hand over myself to Yin Chu to finish off. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. So today we covered challenges and changes in different regions, the what and the now, what are happening, what are the challenges, what we are doing right now. But there are questions remain, like why should we care about gender equity? Why here? Why us? So the panel today would only be the beginning of this conversation, fortunately. So it will go on and to dig deeper into the post and past and history. So stay tuned to the new panel information, and we will release information very shortly in the near future. Before we close this panel, I would like to let you know that if you would like to, well, again, if you would like to contact any of the panelists today to know more about their services, I have the contact information right in the meeting chat. Will come out soon, I guess. So I'm sure that they will happy to answer any of your questions. So lastly, I'd like to thank our dear panelists for the beautiful conversations, and also thank you, our dear participants, and thank you, my dear, dear, dear moderator, Mona Lisa, and also thanks my technical team members. Well, thank you all for coming today. I hope you enjoyed today's session. So enjoy your morning, afternoon, and evening.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much indeed, Ying Chu. Thank you very much indeed, Mona Lisa. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to stay with us in the room, the recording will be stopped if you would like to continue for a few minutes. This has been a Systemic Diversity and Inclusion Group presentation coming to you from Japan, from Ghana, and from the Gambia and Texas in the USA. On the tutelage of our president, Dr. Joseph Nwaye, we thank you so much for taking your time to attend and support these fantastic people. Thank you very much.